Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
Welcome back. I'm Domenic Rinaldi, host of the M&A Unplugged podcast. In today's episode, you are going to hear from Keith Knohl, who always dreamed of owning his own business. In fact, he tried to start a few ventures during his long and successful corporate career. But like the vast majority of all startups, he could never quite get it off the ground. So Keith decided that buying an existing business that already had ongoing revenues, profits, clients, trained employees, and a foundation was a much smarter and safer path to business ownership. Prior to successfully acquiring Technical Doctor this summer, an IT services firm, Keith was a 25-year veteran in the information technology industry. Most notably, he was the chief information officer of a primary care practice with locations in 23 states. And he was a VP of IT services for the nation's largest nonprofit hospice provider. Keith was confident he could transfer his years of IT and management experience to the right business and then take it to the next level. Keith shares his journey of buying a business, which included retaining a buy-side broker to help him through all phases of the process, since he had never acquired a business before. There are many key takeaways in this episode which can help you plan for and execute your own business ownership process. But before we get into today's episode, if you want to avoid common deal pitfalls and the risk of losing substantial dollars, you need to know how ready you really are to buy a business. Because I believe proper preparation is so critical to deal success, we have published several free resources to help you be better prepared. You can access these resources on our website at k2advisor.com/resources. Being prepared is critical to ensuring that you maximize returns and minimize risks. Thank you for being here and hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey, Keith, welcome to M&A Unplugged. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
You know, I'm so excited about this interview because you are like so many of our other clients who have really long and very successful corporate careers, but, somewhere along the way, they're thinking, maybe I could do this for myself. And maybe there's a path to building wealth for myself. And so I'm so excited to have you share your journey with everybody about how you got here, because you just closed on your first business not too long ago.
Yes.
And we're going to dive into that. But before we do, if you could give everybody a quick backgrounder on what you've done, and then we'll dive into to your path to own a business.
Sure. Well, quick summary of me. Got out of college, went to college, business administration degree. Got out of college and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Got into banking, and then while in my first job, I found out that I really loved technology and computers and software a lot more than operations per se. And so I quickly got into IT and worked my way through the IT landscape, from tech support, network administration, security, programming, project management. I kind of did a couple of years in each realm, and then decided that I really wanted to be a leader in IT, and got a master's degree, and then became a leader at some smaller firms. Was a manager, a director, and worked on a couple of startups, and had an idea that I wanted to own my own business. And so I started a couple of startups that went very poorly. It's hard to get a startup off the ground. The product is unknown, the company is unknown, the process is unknown, the people are unknown, and so you're really building from scratch a full running organization. And so after I worked for a couple startups and I've tried to start a couple of businesses, I got back into corporate life and eventually was the CIO of a large national primary care practice. I've been the HIPAA risk assessment the HIPAA security officer for a number of healthcare organizations. And I decided it was time to get back into looking at running my own business again. This time, instead of starting it from scratch, I wanted to buy one that was already in place, one that already had healthcare customers, that already had employees and processes, already had a known name in the market, so that I didn't have to go through those early growing pains of a startup again. That I could just go right out of the gate and start working on operational efficiencies, customer service, improving technology for people who need it in the healthcare industry in particular, and generally in small to medium-sized businesses.
Well, you don't know this, but you're a great straight man, because I think in next week or the week after, we're dropping an episode that is solely focused on buy versus start. And, one of the things that I talk about is that most startups, 50% of startups fail inside of 3 years, and the vast majority don't get to 5 years.
Right.
And over 95% never really turn a profit. So when you think about the odds of starting a business and having it be successful, they're really very small compared to you buy an existing business that you said, like you said, has all of those elements already in place, revenues and clients and processes and a brand and, all of those things. If it's the right business for you, you can easily take it to the next level. So thanks for that episode preamble for us. So maybe talk a little bit about your decision to go after an existing business and how you started that journey.
So I decided to go after an existing business because I wanted to run as an IT leader within a medium-sized organization. I ran an organization. I ran a business within a business, and I had profit and loss responsibility for the budget that they had given me to run under. I had learned how to reduce costs within that organization and within other organizations that I've been with in the past. And I viewed it as the other departments were my customers, and this was my business, and my employees were my team members. And I took that model and said, if I can do this and be successful with my department leaders and my coworkers as my employees, and my team members as my customers, my team members as my employees, I should be able to do this the same way with a company that does this for others. And so what I did is I started looking. I went to a lot of the websites that produce ads or leads, just like a job board or just like a dating website necessarily. There are business websites that post offers that other companies are proposing that they are interested to sell. And I found a couple, but I wasn't finding an IT organization. I wasn't finding one that matched my background. I was finding wholesale distributors, and I talked to a funeral wholesale distributor. I found a lot of liquor stores and gas stations. I found a lot of just random businesses, but they weren't, the technology ones that I found were very niche, very specific, and not kind of doing what I've done for my career, which was, managing IT organizations for other departments. And so at that point, I actually turned to Sun Acquisitions and asked them to help me find a business as a buyer's broker, to help me find a business that better fit my background and my needs, because I didn't find that in the marketplace.
Yeah. How long had you been looking before you arrived at the decision to maybe engage a buy-side broker?
I had been looking for about 6 to 8 months. My wife was encouraging me to find something else because I had started down the road on a wholesale distributor and on a food distributor. And she said, you're just not going to be happy there. You're not going to, you're trying to find something.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to find something that's going to be a good answer in the long run.
Yeah. I think you just gave the audience a really key nugget here, which is, a lot of folks, in my experience doing this for decades now, they focus on cash flow and geography and not so much on, is it a good strategic fit for me in the long run? Is this a business I'm going to be excited about running every day? Not only excited about running, but can you take it to the next level? Do you have the skill set to take it forward? And in that regard, it's so important before you even launch a search. And I offer this advice to everybody. Before you even launch a search, really build a strategic plan around what you're trying to accomplish. What are the types of businesses you're interested in? And all the other things that go into that. Geography, do you want a management team? Do you not want a management team? All the things that make for a good acquisition for yourself. So it sounds like your wife is very smart and in tune with you very well.
She's in tune with me, and she knows what's going to really drive me and where I'm going to find value and where I won't lose interest in 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, good. Well, you have a good partner there. It sounds like that's very important. So, okay, so you decided, all right, I'm going to engage a buy-side broker and see if I can go after this another way. Talk to us about your experience there. What surprised you about that process? Did it go the way you had expected? And talk about the journey overall.
I didn't know what to expect. I bought some houses in the past, so I knew that there are transactions that are managed by both buyer and seller brokers. And I kept coming back to the model of a home transaction where I have the buyer's broker and the seller has the seller's broker, and the brokers help us figure this out. What I found was that the industry, the M&A industry, really focuses on the seller's broker, and most of the time there is no buyer's broker. The seller's broker is supposed to be the broker for both sides, but clearly they have an interest in closing the deal. They have an interest in selling because that's where they get their commission. That's where they produce their value. And so I was happily surprised that having a buyer's broker provided more advice, more direction, more guidance on the project than just having a seller's broker. During the initial process, we searched the zip codes that I knew about that I was interested in for companies that were within the geography and within the types of businesses I was looking for. But what was fascinating is that I ultimately found the job or the posting on a website. I continued to look, even working with the buyer's broker, and I ended up finding the lead on my own. But what was fabulous about having the buyer's broker there is that they walked me through the entire process. They helped me negotiate the price. They helped me find an attorney and an accountant to help. They gave me advice along the way when we came into hiccups on what is an SBA loan, what's reasonable. They provided a third point an extra point of reference for the seller's brokers who were out of state and who may not have had as much expertise in a small business transaction as they could have had. And so it actually worked out very, very well for me. And I think for the transaction as a whole.
Yeah, so let me go back to, I want to wind back just a little bit here. So you referenced first having a buyer's broker and a seller's broker. And for the audience, just so we can distinguish, Um, as a broker, or as a buyer, you never want to get into a situation where you're working with a broker where they're getting paid by both parties. A broker really should have a fiduciary to one party or the other. It's very difficult to straddle that fence when you're getting paid from both parties. So you want to steer clear of any situation like that. But you're right. Most of the transactions that happen in the lower middle market, there's a sell side agent that's representing the seller, and they work with buyers, but they're just trying to get them interested in the deal. They really represent the seller. In this case, you hired somebody that's looking after your interests. You're paying their fee separate from the seller's agent. And then you talked about the first step, which was when you engage a buyer's broker, really one of the big values there, and you were hinting to it, is they developed a list of all of the targets in an industry that you're interested in. So in your case, it was IT, and the team put together a list of targets that generally fit your acquisition criteria. And
that's right.
And that's really, there's a tremendous amount of hidden value in doing a search that way, because you're going after people that are not actively on the market. And maybe they've thought about selling, but they're not actively selling. And it gives you as a buyer an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation. But we always tell clients that while we're off doing that work for them and trying to find owners of businesses that want to sell, you should still be looking, because you never know what pops up. And in your case, it happened to work out that way. You found a business by continuing to look, and it was, it hit all of your criteria.
It was interesting. I was looking in certain geographies for an IT services organization, and it just one popped up, and so I brought it to the buyer's broker, and we talked about it, and he helped me craft a letter of introduction and some of the initial conversations. It just turned out that it worked out that way.
Yeah.
It could have gone, either way. And I was really glad of walking through the process of looking at different businesses, and it helped me narrow down what my interests were.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah. Well, and if you wind back to what you said earlier, you were already looking for 6 to 8 months and nothing popped up that really hit your criteria. So it takes a long time. That's the other reason you engage a buy-side broker, is it condenses that 6 to 8 month period to probably 2 to 3 months.
The looking process.
Yeah, the looking process. That's exactly right. So let's talk about, so now you find the target, and now you begin what I call the dance. Now you're trying to get to know the business, get the owner, understand if this business is right for you. Talk a little bit about that phase. What was that like, going through and learning about the business and whether or not it was a good fit?
Well, the process involves a bunch of documentation that the seller's broker puts together, and you get to dig through. That's, in my mind, kind of boring. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of background, a lot of numbers, but also it's important to read through it and understand it, because this is the basis of the organization, and this is how they're selling it. I also looked at their website. I met with the seller. I met with him in person before COVID broke out. We met, we had coffee, we sat down, we talked, we got to know each other a little bit better and understand kind of where we were coming from. I was able to explain my background and what I was looking to do with the organization, that I wanted to engage, I wanted to improve their processes, I wanted to maintain all of their employees if possible. And we kind of shared our common background. Since he had come out of IT and was running an IT organization, I came out of IT and wanted to run an IT organization. There was some synergies and some perception that the organization would continue on past his tenure.
And it sounds like a bonding. You guys had common ground to talk about.
We did.
Yeah.
We did. And it was a really great opportunity. And we kept coming back to that initial meeting several times during the rest of the conversation, where it was very helpful to say, during that initial call, we had this relationship. And we wanted the employees, the customers, everybody else to continue on and continue to be well served into the future.
Yeah, and I have to say that initial meeting is so important. People sometimes take too casual of an approach to that first meeting. And the reason I say it's so important is if you build rapport, and it sounds like you did, and you found some way to bond with each other, your IT backgrounds, and the fact that you wanted to take the business to the next level, it gives you the foundation of rapport because it's a long process and things happen and it gets sometimes contentious. But if you build that foundation early on and that rapport, it's much easier to get through those hiccups later on down the road. Whereas if you take a more casual, cavalier approach to that first meeting and don't take the time to build a rapport, if something happens later on down the road, you might not be able to get over the speed bump.
Correct.
Yeah.
And things do happen down the road. There are bumps, there are hiccups, there's misunderstandings. The purchase or the sale process is not one that's quick.
Yeah.
It's a lot longer than buying a car, which is slow.
Yeah, I want you to talk a bit about that. I'm going to make a point, but I want you to talk a bit about that. I'm going to tell you, after decades of doing this, 100% of the time something comes up. I've yet to have a deal where something does. So it's so important to have that rapport right up front because when it does, you have the ability to get past it. But yeah, please share some, if you've got a story or two or you want to keep it at a high level, but talk about now the process. So you met the owner, you decide to make an offer. What happens from there?
The first thing that you do is you provide a letter of intent. It's not binding, but it's a letter that signifies or encapsulates what you're willing to do. It's essentially your starting offer. I added to the beginning of my letter of intent, after talking to my buyer's broker about strategy and how to position it and where to go with it. At the very beginning, I reiterated the value of the organization, the history of the prior owner, the value of where he was coming from and what he was doing and where, some of the decision making that he had made, to continue to sell him on my value, because a lot of companies receive multiple letters of intent. Yeah. And so it's kind of like a resume or a cover letter, in the sense that this is your chance to sell and to continue to sell the idea that this is what you want to do. That letter of intent is your start. You then discuss it with the seller, and I don't know, something may have happened behind the scenes, but at some point the seller decides to accept your letter of intent or not. And that's, if they accept it, that's the start of the negotiation, where you're going to start to figure out, where he's going to push, where you're going to push, how that dance is going to continue.
So you got to the point where you got an accepted LOI, and now you head into diligence. Talk a bit about your experience in due diligence, and any hiccups, anything that surprised you.
There's a lot to dig into in due diligence. We had a document library created where the seller would upload documents and I would read them. It was a lot. There is a lot of information to dig through, and you're always afraid that you're going to miss something. And in many cases, you're probably going to miss a lot of things because you're reading hundreds of pages of contracts and hundreds of pages of financial statements. We engaged an accountant to help me dig through the financial statements, and they did an assessment going back 12 months, and they also did an assessment for the prior year end, to make sure that all of the financials kind of lined up and were similar to what the seller had presented. While I don't think they ever lined up 100%, they were within a margin of error. They were plus or minus 5%, maybe even 6, 7%.
But nothing material.
Nothing huge.
Yep.
And when looking my perception was always looking forward. Would any of these things negatively impact me going forward? And it turned out that no, in that case. I also had engaged an attorney to help me start writing the asset purchase agreement and to review some of the contracts to make sure that the contracts were binding and I had some transition opportunity before customers just bailed. My fear was that at the transition, that's a great opportunity for customers to reevaluate their relationship with the company. And so I wanted to make sure that the contracts were enforced so that they didn't have, the ability to just wholesale up and leave. Because to a large extent, that's what I was buying, was those customers and their ongoing relationship with the company.
Correct. And your advisors, I happen to know these were M&A advisors, people who had done transactions, and so you had a high level of confidence that they knew what they were doing and could provide you good advice.
They did, and they were recommended by my broker, and they had done several transactions for them in the past, and so I knew they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I had to rely on somebody. I had to assume, somebody on my team was good and accurate.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the reasons why I chose the broker's recommendations. They gave me 3 or 4 to call. I called 3 or 4, and I picked one. But at the end of the day, I needed people on my team that that knew what they were doing, because to a large extent, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I needed to
it's
rely
so
on
key
others.
to make sure that you have advisors who have mergers and acquisitions experience. You don't want necessarily an estate attorney doing your M&A deal unless they have a lot of M&A experience, but you really need experts here that understand this process.
During the transaction, in some cases, the seller's brokers didn't understand the SBA process. My transaction happened to fall under the Small Business Administration, the SBA. I don't know, it's a 7A loan or something like that.
Yep.
And there's some regulations, there's some things that are specific to that transaction.
Yeah.
How long can the seller stay on board after the sale closes? What do you need up front? What kind of timing is going to be impacted by the bank coming in? And the seller's attorneys or the seller's brokers didn't know. They didn't have a lot of impact or a lot of experience with the SBA. My broker having experience with the SBA really helped a lot.
Yeah. How did you find that process with the SBA, going through that loan process? Was it easy? Things that you think the audience would appreciate knowing?
It was easy but long. It's kind of like a really long mortgage application process. They ask for a ton of information. They want to appraise the business. They want to review the financials of the business. They want you to have life insurance to cover the loan if something were to happen to you. It was very structured. That may have something to do with the closer that I was working with and the bank that I was working with, that my experience was just very structured.
Yep.
But they gave me a checklist up front and said, you check all these things off and we close.
There you go.
And so my job was to check off every single one of those things, and we closed.
About 90 days roughly, maybe, to go through the loan process?
Go through the loan process? I think so. I think from the time my letter of intent was signed to closing, I think was 110 days.
110 days, yeah.
Part of that was we wanted to get it on an end of month.
Yep.
Part of it was the life insurance process is long and stressful in some cases, because we were running up against a deadline where we needed it assigned and a policy number, and I don't know that I got it started soon enough, but ultimately it all kind of came together.
lots of parallel processing when you're in diligence, right? You're doing diligence, you're going to the bank, you're doing the bank's checklist. I mean, there's lots of parallel processing,
Right.
and if you have a full-time job while you're doing this, it's a lot.
It's a lot. You're doing two different things in due diligence, which I found was fascinating. One is that you're working through the checklist of the bank, and the other is you're starting your company from scratch.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't necessarily ready for. Although I should have been. You got to think about things, but you have to register with the federal government. You have to register with the state government. You've got to register with the city. You've got to get a bank account. You've got to get a credit card. All the things that you need to do in order to have a running business,
Yeah.
You need to do while you're in due diligence and before you've closed.
Yeah.
So in some cases, these things are happening before you're ready, before I was ready for them to happen.
Yeah.
I wasn't convinced that our deal was going to close. At some points, it kind of is a cycle. You go through some questioning and there's some pushback. And when you're questioning whether or not the deal is going to close, you wonder if your credit card application was timely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you referenced something going back to the bank, that the bank is going to do an appraisal. And I just want to make a note here for everybody that as part of an SBA loan, the bank is required to send the file to a third party to have it independently appraised. So even though the buyer and the seller may have agreed to a price, it still has to pass the sniff test of a third party that does nothing but value small, privately held companies. And so that's a big deal, because if it doesn't pass that, it comes back to the parties to either renegotiate the deal or figure out something else. But it has to pass that step. And that step alone takes a couple of weeks.
It does. Thankfully, I didn't have to renegotiate it, so I don't know what happens if it doesn't pass. But again, I kind of draw the parallel to a mortgage, where even after you discuss a price, then a third party comes in and does an appraisal on a house.
That's right. Yeah, it's not a happy day when it doesn't come back. That's a very difficult process. So I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about your new company, because now you're offering a service that actually can help people who are in M&A deals. But before we do that, anything overall, if you would take a step up at the 50,000 foot level, anything overall, any advice that you would offer to buyers out there who are going down this path?
I found the buyer's broker to be very handy, to be very helpful. It was not cheap. In the grand scheme of things, it was probably minuscule, but compared to the size of the deal. But it's an expense. But between the help with the negotiation, the help with the process, the help with just the general advice, and the hand holding through the process. When you go through an M&A deal, there's a lot of ups and downs. And for people like me who don't do this every day, I'm not a private equity firm, I'm an individual. I don't buy and sell companies every day. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of hiccups that happen.
Yeah.
And I found that process to be very, very helpful.
Yeah. It's not like buying a house. The process of buying a business is very complex with lots of nuances, little things that you would never even think of. So I think that's a point well taken. So fast forward to today, you closed on your IT business. How are things going? And can you talk a little bit about this new service that you're offering that can help people who are in mergers and acquisitions look at their IT business,
Sure.
part of their business?
So my company's name is Technical Doctor. It does IT managed services for small to medium-sized companies. We manage computers, workstations, servers, hosting, do risk assessments, do security assessments, manage people's security, and just anything an IT organization would be doing for you at an organization, at a company, we will do for smaller entities. The types of services we have are almost anything IT related we can help you with. But what you're referring to is when you're buying a small company, one of your assets is your IT infrastructure that the prior owner had built and managed over a period of time. And in many cases, that may be old. That may not manage your organization going forward. And so we've put together an offering where we can offer to small business buyers a service to assess somebody's IT infrastructure. Do they have old licenses? Are they overpaying? Should they look at the cloud in the future? Are some of the computers obsolete and should be replaced? What kind of software licenses do you have, and whether or not they're relevant to the organization going forward? Or are they just something that they bought in the past and really shouldn't continue with for whatever reason?
Got it. That's great. Very needed service. There are things that people overlook about the post-closing and IT and HR, unfortunately, are two of the biggest things people overlook. They don't plan for ahead of time. So I think that's a great service. And just speaking about transition, how was the transition into the business? How did your first 30, 60 days go? And any advice there for folks as they, take over a new business?
It has been a load of fun.
That's great.
I have been, so one of the challenges was moving over all of the accounts, finding all of the passwords, figuring out all of the different places where services were being provided by some third party web version of something, and didn't know what the password was, had to track it down, had to figure out who the vendor was, and transition the credit card payment from the seller to myself. That took a long time. It took longer than I thought it might. That might have something to do with our industry. We just have a lot of third parties that kind of come together and build our service. The employees were great. The transition, I think they were looking for a different leadership style, maybe. I'm a lot more engaged. I'm a lot more excited. Maybe I'm a lot more excited about where we are because I'm in a new business and he was in an old business that he was looking to leave. But the employees were good and are moving forward. The customers are fun. It's customer service is always a dance. Mm-hmm. You never do everything 100% right, and then you've got to recover, and then figure out a way to not do that again. And so we're working through a lot of different things with customers and making sure that they're happy and we understand their needs going forward. And we're finding our path forward.
That's great. So glad to hear you say you're having so much fun. That's one of the big things. People are looking for financial and personal freedom and some self-fulfillment. And it's great when that happens. Yeah. Keith, really appreciate you taking some time to come and visit with us and share your journey. If folks wanted to reach you in regards to this new service that you've got where you can do an IT audit during a merger and acquisition, how could they get in touch with you?
You can find us at technicaldr.com. That's our website address. Or you can email me at keith.knohl@technicaldr.com. Our website does need a refresh, so don't give us too much of it's on the list. It needs to come up to speed, but at least that's where you can find us.
And Knohl is knohl.com, and we'll have all of that in the show notes. Yeah. Keith, thanks again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe and review our podcast. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.